students. Today I am going to be teaching you how to add one of these, an electric motor, to your robot. Your robot obviously looks different than this. You've got some wheels on it, but this is my gear train and my chassis, and that'll do well enough for me. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see more easily. But here's the deal. You're going to need this, which is an electric motor. You're going to need these, which are your little gold screws, and you're going to need this, which is your 564 hex key. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to pull off this. We're going to attach the this motor to this shaft here, and but as you can see, first I gotta change it around a little bit. This is basically the idea. I'm going to have the motor here on this shaft, and I'm going to attach the motor onto the chassis so it's nice and steady on there, nice and secure rather. But there's a couple things. First thing, let's learn about our electric motor. So we've got our wire here. This is going to get plugged into something called a cortex, which is what supplies the electricity that will flow into the motor. And these are two bolt holes that you're going to screw bolts into to fasten the motor onto the chassis. And this is the part that you put the shaft in. The shaft goes in there. And the way that this works basically is current flows through this wire, and depending upon its polarity and the voltage, the shaft will either spin clockwise or counterclockwise, and it will spin either fast or slow. So the idea is you've got electric current flowing through this wire, and the shaft inside of this motor, the shaft that you're going to put into the motor, is then going to spin either clockwise or counterclockwise, or fast or slow. So the direction of rotation is dependent upon the polarity of the electric current, which you don't understand, but that's okay. And the speed of the rotation is dependent upon the voltage of the current. So how much electricity is going into it speeds it up. More electricity speeds it up, less electricity, and you're going to go slower. And then it can actually change directions as well. So that's the way this electric motor works, more or less, very simply. But as far as you need to know, you attach it with these little screw holes, you put the shaft in there, you plug this thing in, you'll program it eventually and it'll work. But the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to have to take this out, because we're going to put the shaft here. This is going to be our driver gear. This is where we've got our wheels. So our driver gear is here. I've got a big gear here, smaller gears here. So that means what? My gear ratio is small, so my speed is high. I'm going to have lower torque but higher speed because of this gear train. And I want some speed, so that's why it's like that. Now with that being said, the first thing we're going to have to do is actually take this off, which you're probably used to by now. I tell you build something and then I tell you to take it off, right? So we're going to take off this middle shaft. So you start by taking off all the shaft collars, loosening those up, set them aside. Oops, that's the bell. Take the gear out, take the shaft out, and then you're actually going to need to take these bearings out, and I'm going to tell you why. We're going to end up screwing the motor in here. It's a little bit challenging to see, but we're going to screw the motor in here. So we're going to be putting it in the holes where the two rivets are. So you know where those rivets are, right? So where those rivets are is where I'm going to actually be screwing in the motor. Well, guess what? If I've got rivets there, I can't put screws there, so I'm going to have to take those out. And then I'm actually going to be putting my Allen key through these holes here, so I need to take these rivets out as well. So I got to start by taking the bearings off, and that's pretty straightforward and easy to do. All I have to do is kind of poke at the rivet with my Allen key, and that'll give it a little bit of boost, or I can just poke it with my finger. Sometimes it's hard to do it with your finger, but you do it with the Allen key and it'll come right out. And then the only warning I should say is that you should remember where your bearing is. So it's like 2 holes away from this one. So the one that it's closest to, it's 2 holes away. And you probably have it on your other side of your chassis too, so it'll make it easier for you to remember because you can just check the other side. And so we're going to put the motor is going to go on the inside. Okay, so we're going to start by putting our chassis, our bearing back where it was before. So I'm going to put my bearing back here. This is where it was before. And then I'm going to have my motor here. So if you can see it like that, I have my motor here. So I've got my bearings holes, and that's the hole. This hole right here is where my shaft's going to go. So my 2 screws are going to go here and here. So the best way to really do this is to start by putting the bearing on and then putting a screw through. You see that? Just put a screw through there. So what did I do? I took one of these golden screws. It's not a black screw, it's different, it's golden. And I put it through the bearing. Here, how can I show this to you in the best way? So I took that gold screw and I put it through the bearing there. Boom. So now it's in there, you see? And then I'm going to take the motor and I want to screw that in, but how do I do that in the best way? I'm going to start by taking my Allen key, putting it through this hole, and then into the screw. So I'm holding that screw tight in there with the Allen key, if you can see that. Then, and this is the hardest is the first screw. Then I put my motor up to it like this. If you can see that, hopefully. So I've got my motor up against it like that, and then I just screw it in. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, right? So, and I screw it in. And once you've got it a little bit in, that's good enough, and it won't come out. Then you want to get that second one in, okay? And you could screw it in a little tighter than that. In fact, actually it's better to screw it in a little bit tighter. You don't want it too tight, but you want it tight enough so it's not wobbling around anymore, because it just makes it easier to get the second one in. So screw that first one in. Don't make it super tight. And the reason why is because you still have a second one to put in. So I then take the second screw, I put that in, so it's held there, and then I screw this in as well. Same way, I'm putting it through the chassis. See? Okay. And I just slowly screw it in. Okay. Boom. Now, when you're screwing these screws in, you really don't want to make them too tight. Once they're snug and it feels like you get some resistance, that's good. You don't want to like really try and tighten it up, because that's not going to do you any good. In fact, what can happen is these screws can get locked inside of the motor, and it becomes almost impossible to get them out. And I've actually lost a motor by doing that, so let's not do that. And then you want to put the other bearing in. So the next step is putting this bearing back in here where it was originally, just opposite that bearing that you just screwed in. And again, you might need to separate the pin part from the sheath on the rivet, because it's like this. When you have it like this, that's got the pin and the sheath together, but you might need to separate them to get them into the bearing. So, don't be afraid to pull them apart and put them in separately, because you'll put the sheath in first, and then once you've got the sheath in, you put in the pin. Sometimes they can go in right away, and that's great if they do, but if they don't, then you got to separate them. Okay, so that one went in right away. And so what do I have now? I have that bearing in, I have this bearing in here, so I just put that one in, and I have this bearing that got screwed in to the thing, okay? So that's what that looks like now, okay? And so this motor now is nice and secure, okay? So that's solid. Now all I have to do is just put my shaft back in with my gear. So how am I going to do that? Well, I put the shaft through the hole here, and I got to remember how I put it in. So I need to, I'm going to put a shaft collar in first. Hold this up. Put a shaft collar in first. And then I put the screw in. I put the gear in like this. And then I put it through. You see? But then I need another shaft collar right here. I need to put another shaft collar right here. So I go ahead and do that. And then I might need to turn it around a little bit to get it to go into the motor, because depending upon it, and boom, I just got it in. You'll feel it when it goes in. Now, what you want to do now is keep it pressed tight. Keep this pressed tight against the motor, because you want it all the way in the motor. So I'm pressing tight with this finger, and then I want to lock it in here. Tighten this one first. I can use my thumb to press that, make sure that's tight. And you can kind of see it's, you gotta use some dexterity there. And then I'll tighten this second shaft collar here and get that nice and tight. And once that's done, I'm good. I don't need to put a shaft collar here anymore, because guess what? It can't get pushed through the motor. So all I need is those two shaft collars, and I'm done. And there you have it. You now have your gear train with your electric motor attached. Now the cool thing is this: if you've done it right, if you spin the motor, you can hear the internal mechanisms of your electric motor spinning. If you don't hear that, it means you didn't put your shaft in fully into the motor, and you gotta redo it. So that's that. Here's your drivetrain with your electric motor attached. Good job. Until next time, enjoy robotics.